Answer with Dan and Amy continues now. And make sure to stay tuned to catch me, Mike Gallagher, coming up at 9, only on AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy. So last week, the Tribune did an interesting look back at Tiny Dancer and the campaign cash he's amassed during his tenure as mayor. They, in their story about his present campaign war chest, they look back at the 2015 election in which he raised $24 million. 60% of the mayor's roughly 100 most loyal donors received City Hall benefits and regularly met with Emmanuel. A level of access to provided to a few in the city. But the meeting with Emmanuel is one thing. It's the contracts and other financial benefits, the pay-to-play, which isn't over, despite having 2 pay-to-play governors of the last 4 go to prison, of course, Ryan and Blagojevich. It's just gone from George Ryan's people putting the arm on others to buy $50, $75 tickets to fundraisers to hundreds of thousands, millions, in some cases tens of millions of dollars in benefits to pinstripe patronage gents at big law firms and bond houses and the like. And so updating, the Tribune looked at the $3.1 million that Tiny Dancer has taken in high dollar contributions with the February 19 mayoral election in the offing, and found that 2.1 million of it, nearly 70%, has come from 83 donors who have derived specific benefits, economic benefits, from actions at City Hall. So you think that anybody is chastened by the experience of all the politicians that have gone to prison, including at the highest levels in the state? No, they're not. No. In fact, what they've done is get out from Main Street and take it to Wall Street, or in this case, LaSalle Street and Bull Mish and all of the halls of power, the big law firms, the white tablecloth set. That's what's actually happening. That's why there's that much more money. I mean, George Ryan, even Blagojevich were pikers compared to what we're talking about here with Tiny Dancer. And yet, outside of this report, it doesn't seem like there's the same level of scrutiny or the same level of association with corruption. And the question is, should there be that same level of scrutiny and that same level of association? To help us answer that question, we're pleased to be joined by Faisal Khan, who's the former legislative inspector general for the Chicago City Council. Now he's the CEO of Project 6, which does all kinds of investigatory work. And he's got a recent piece, Chicago ranks worst for financial disclosure requirements, meaning for politicians and candidates, among major cities. Faisal, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning. So you've done a little bit of compare and contrast between Chicago and other major cities when it comes to what candidates and politicians are required to disclose in terms of their economic interests. Give us a little summary of that.
Yeah, Dan, we looked at a number of major cities. We compared L.A., Phoenix, Dallas, Charlotte, New York, and Chicago. And unfortunately, not to your surprise and not to everyone else's, Chicago is pretty much dead last when it comes to making our elected officials disclose financial information to taxpayers to know whether they're susceptible to corruption or not.
Well, give us an example of, like, even in other, like, blue states, what California requires or New York requires that we don't.
Sure. Well, look, we looked at a bunch of categories, Dan. We looked at income and employment, gifts, travel expenses, debts and loans, real estate, and what we found, for instance, in travel expenses, you know that our mayor travels a lot, as you noted earlier, and we don't ask. We don't ask what it costs to hop on a private jet or who's paying or picking up that tab in case there's any kind of conflict of interest. Whereas cities like Phoenix ask whether or not you've attended, which conferences you've attended, which meetings you've attended, and whether or not they've incurred over $1,000 in travel-related expenses, which weren't picked up by you. Phoenix is asking that question, yet Chicago does not ask it whatsoever. Let's talk about real estate. We don't ask enough questions about our real estate in Chicago. We simply ask, do you have a financial other than your primary home, whereas every other jurisdiction asks much more detailed questions. Take New York, for instance. Report any real estate in which you have a vested or even contingent interest valued at $1,000 or more, including timeshares, real estate outside of New York and in the whole United States. So that gives you an idea, Dan, of what we're dealing with here. That it's not even so much the elected officials. The city itself is not interested in knowing who's working and taking taxpayer dollars at this point.
So, okay, well, then sometimes, though, officials get caught. I mean, look at Barbara Byrd Bennett and what she did.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. But the point of these disclosures is to be able to identify potential conflicts of interest up front, not after they happen. So, for instance, had we known that Barbara Byrd Bennett was in debt or had significant dealings with her past employers, we may have been a little more cautious and a little more aware of how she was doling out deals and getting kickbacks through CPS.
Yeah, it's a fair point. What about with respect to appointees? I mean, for example, the CPS board has a lot of power and power over contracting, and they were apparently asleep at the switch with Barbara Byrd Bennett's schemes. So, but I mean, mayoral appointees can have a lot of influence as well.
Yeah, no question. Look, Dan, you made a very good point, right, just before I came on, and pointed out that the Tribune study showed that 83 people have made up a bulk of the...
Faisal?
Hello?
Oh, no. Tiny Dancer has cut the line. Oh, Faisal, you back?
Yeah, I hope.
Oh, okay.
About that. I don't know how I lost you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Don't move around, though.
You were, yeah, it's just stay.
If the cell works, don't move.
Yeah, you need that satellite dish back on the top of your head. So you were making the point about the Tribune story and about the 83 donors representing 70% of Rahm's contributions.
Well, basically, had that information been disclosed and that the mayor has taken money from people who may be getting benefits from the city, we would be asking a lot more questions than just talking about it today. The reality is that's what goes on when we just don't have enough disclosures of potential conflicts of interest. And the Board of Ethics here in Chicago, through this ethical disclosure form, simply are not asking enough questions at this point.
Yeah, and I hear, what about the issue, too? I mean, this gets beyond disclosure. This is, kind of how they operate in public office, so you're not necessarily going to catch this at the preemptory stage like you're talking about. But this idea, like, okay, we're going to borrow a ton of money, so we got, the bond purveyors, the bond houses that are going to stand to benefit, and then the bond houses and the bond counsel go to their let's use the bond counsel, for example. The blue chip law firms pass the hat and say, hey, everybody write a $5,000 check. We got to send that over to Tiny Dancer's campaign account. That stuff's real. It happens. I know it happens. You can actually discern it from his financial reports, his campaign committee reports. So what about that sort of, that's straight pay to play, isn't it?
No question about it. Look, if you can identify that law firm is doing business with the city, yet they're going around hat in hand collecting money for the alderman or mayor, for instance, then yeah, that's a conversation we have to be having in terms of what services is that law firm getting and what's the value of that, and why isn't that being disclosed so we can make educated decisions as to whether or not they deserve a contract or not.
And so give me an example of reforms that you would propose that you think could at least raise the bar and bring us in line with other cities that do a better job at the front end of this process.
Let me put it to you this way, Dan. New York has a 31-page form when it comes to disclosures. LA is 23 pages. It goes on and on. Chicago, 2.
2. Yeah.
Sure.
2 pages.
Do you promise to be honest? Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Welcome to the city council.
Yeah. And the rest of it is describe your favorite baseball team.
Yeah, right.
And why?
And why? We have 2 pages and 16 questions.
Now, is one of those pages a standing invite to Ed Burke's fundraisers?
There is, and I think there's a Chicago flag that covers the half of another page.
Yeah, right.
So you know what needs to be done. I mean, just that disclosure alone tells you how far behind we are when it comes to the promises we make to right by ethics.
I have a crazy question for you because I'm always curious about this. I know that the manuals fly privately. Who Who does give them, or whose jet do they borrow, or is it given to? And should we know about that?
We should, Amy, and it's the millionaires, the people who are flying ROM and who are also getting lots of taxpayer dollars with contracts with the city of Chicago. The mayor should be disclosing every gift in kind he gets, and that includes travel on an airplane, and we should be reporting that every year so taxpayers can see exactly who the mayor owes a favor to when he gets a free ride on a jet to wherever he wants to go.
So I recall Mayor Tiny Dancer making a big issue of transparency, much like the president for whom he served as chief of staff. He was going to be the most transparent administration in the history of the city of Chicago. Now, that's sort of a low bar, but I wonder how you would assess his performance against that pronouncement.
I have nothing personal against Rahm Emanuel, Dan, but he gets a flat F when it comes to this.
Okay.
All right. Well,
The grade is in.
that's it looks like he's going to have to repeat the class. Hopefully, not repeat his term as mayor, but we'll see about that in 2019. The study, the investigative report, Chicago ranks worst for financial disclosure requirements among major cities. You can find it at thesecret6.com, thesecret6.com. He is Faisal Khan, CEO of Project 6 and former legislative inspector general for the Chicago City Council. Faisal, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen.